The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
You know, it's time to wake up as we turn the calendar over to March, that the Capitals may be working on another Stanley Cup season, which has truly come out of nowhere. Almost like the Commanders, but there was no big addition like a franchise quarterback who was spectacular. The guy who's been here for 20 years, he's spectacular and has been spectacular for most of his 20-year career, but nobody thought he would be this good as he closes in on 40. But it's like we say sometimes, we're going to need a bigger boat. And springtime on my bingo card did not include another Stanley Cup parade, but that can happen. Now, hockey's very random. You don't know what happens once you get to the playoffs. Capitals have won President's Cups before for best regular season record and have gone out in the first round. As a matter of fact, since they won the Stanley Cup in 2018, they have not gotten past the first round. But what I thought was going to be, and I'm truly working on limited hockey knowledge here, but what I thought was going to be sort of a rebuild and sort of a drag number 8 along until he gets the record has turned into a team that has been unbelievable. I mean, they had a weekend where they just played two teams, one of them on the road and the other one that's the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, the Edmonton Oilers, and they scored 15 goals against those two teams. And against the Oilers, Ovechkin had the hat trick, which has now put him 13 goals away from breaking the record. And Barry Svrluga's got a column today in the Post about this, about how good they are and maybe how good they can be. A couple of things to realize that maybe you don't necessarily calculate when you look at the standings. Last 21 games, and some of these are back-to-back on the road. They have had one regulation loss in 21 games. The conference finalists from last year, which would be Edmonton, Dallas, Florida, and the New York Rangers. Washington is 7-1-0 against them. There are 25 games left to go. Alex Ovechkin right now is healthy, clearly. It's amazing that this is a season that included a broken leg and 16 missed games. And here we are projecting him to break the Gretzky record on the 4th of April. That's how things have ramped up here. And I think at the beginning of the season, we all said, or many of us said, yeah, maybe he gets it this year, but more likely it's going to be sometime next year. Remember last season, he got off to a terrible start. It was like, oh, man, they may have to sign him to a contract extension to get that done. But he has turned it on from the second half of last season to the point where he is now. And, again, it's with 25 games to go and 13 goals needed to break Gretzky's record, he should do it with time to spare. I mean, things could happen, and he could get an injury, which we sometimes don't even find out about. The broken leg, they finally had to say something. But a lot of times it's upper body or lower body or, he could just go into a slump. There are things that could happen that could push this to next year. But Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the league, was on the Rich Eisen show yesterday, and he said plans are already in the works with Bettman teaming up with Wayne Gretzky to start going to Capitals games as Ovechkin closes in on the record.
Wayne and I were having a discussion, because we're going to do this together, whether or not we should start with 5 goals left or 3 or 4 goals left. Although I'm not sure, based on what happened yesterday, when he had Patrick, that we should be letting it get that close to the end.
You're a couple hats away, Commissioner. I mean, you might have to be there, Yeah,
well, we'll be there. And he is just a marvel. And it's great to see how enthused everybody is, including Wayne, about the prospect of a record that nobody ever thought would be broken, actually being broken. And it's testament to a great record that Wayne set and a great career that Alex has had in terms of his skill, his dominance in the game, and how he's managed to stay healthy for 2 decades.
So the Wayne and Gary tour coming soon to the National Hockey League?
Coming to a show near you.
Very good.
With what happened on Sunday, I wonder, as we get closer, I don't want to say teams are going to intentionally give up goals. That wouldn't happen. But what happened on Sunday with Washington up by 3 goals and 4 minutes to go, Edmonton pulled their goalie. That's an unusual move. You're not making a comeback like that with less than 4 minutes to go. And it was a favor to Ovechkin. And he got an empty net goal, and he's gotten a bunch of them. But do not take anything away from the record. And I remember hearing this as he was making his way in the early years. Goal scoring is a lot tougher now than it was with Wayne Gretzky. Take nothing away from Gretzky, who's the greatest player who ever lived. And the fact that if you took away his goals and you just took his assists, he would have the most points in NHL history. That's all you need to know. And he didn't play 20 years like Ovechkin. But he is the greatest hockey player, but Ovechkin will eventually be the greatest goal scorer. And I agree with what Bettman said. Nobody thought that record would be broken. It's kind of like, and it may happen because of the way defenses are in the NFL, though there is seemingly a shift back to running the ball more with what Saquon Barkley did for the Eagles. But Jerry Rice, with over 1,500 career receptions, has put it out there enough that it seems unlikely. I say seems, you never know. But it seems unlikely that anybody's going to break that anytime soon. But, people said that about the Babe Ruth home run record until Henry Aaron broke it in 1974. So we've had these kinds of records before. The Cal Ripken record, I can't imagine. I mean, nobody's getting close to 1,000 now. So what is it, 2,632, I believe is the number. Nobody's going to touch that in consecutive games played. So that may be a record that's out there, kind of like Cy Young winning over 500 games. But what Ovechkin is doing is absolutely remarkable. And I was listening to my buddy Kevin Sheehan yesterday talking about the moments that we've had in this town and what are the great moments, not the great games, not the Super Bowl wins for the Redskins or the Bullets championship in 78 or the championships that Maryland and Georgetown has won in basketball. It's not that. It's moments. And he put the ouster of Dan Snyder number 1. I would have a hard time disagreeing with that, I should say. Yeah, that's out there. But this would be right up there. And in terms of record breakers, we did have Art Monk breaking Steve Largent's record. We did have Charlie Taylor breaking Don Maynard's record for most career receptions when he retired, and that's been almost tripled now by Jerry Rice. But at the time, that was the record, 642 career receptions that Charlie Taylor set in 1976. And then we had Russell Westbrook, and I don't even know the number, but he broke the career triple-double record that Oscar Robertson set. But he was like a one-year rental. This is totally different. And not that Oscar Robertson isn't one of the great players who ever lived, but this to me, when Ovechkin breaks Gretzky's record, this is the equivalent of Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's record, because Babe Ruth, and we'll see what Shohei Ohtani does, but at the moment, I think Babe Ruth remains the greatest baseball player who ever lived. He was a great pitcher and also for many years held the all-time home run record. And to me, he is the most iconic name in sports, much less baseball, and certainly the name Wayne Gretzky is that in hockey. So yesterday, Steve Levy, who's part of ESPN's hockey coverage, was on the Dan Patrick Show, and they talked about the significance of Gretzky for the sport and for the culture. And that's why this record isn't just to get the all-time goal-scoring record. It's to get a record that was held or is currently held and will be held maybe until next season, but more likely until the end of this season or April 4th when he's projected or whenever he breaks it. It's Wayne Gretzky. It's Wayne effing Gretzky. And this was Levy yesterday with Dan Patrick discussing the impact that Gretzky has had, not just on hockey, but the entire culture.
You look at the cultural impact of Gretzky, and I liken it to now you have Caitlin Clark, who is opening up the entire United States for WNBA teams. Now all of a sudden you have Boston once won, and Portland, and Gretzky did that when he came to Los Angeles. The fact that there was going to be hockey in Florida, and people are like, Really? But that's because of Wayne Gretzky.
And the amount of youth hockey rinks that exploded and opened up. And I mentioned Bobby Orr, but, all over Massachusetts, people went wild for Bobby Orr and all of those things. And yes, Wayne Gretzky, Anaheim, obviously Los Angeles, all of those southern states, for a long time, we had a team in Arizona. That didn't work out, but in the desert, they were playing hockey. And the great example of that is, DP is, Austin Matthews. So he grew up in Arizona. He was at the game where Ovechkin scores what is many believe is the greatest single regular season goal of all time. On his stomach, on his back, twisting around. Austin Matthews is in the building for that game, for that Coyotes home game. And so whatever spurred him on, and so players are then exposed to it. The Caitlin Clark, it's a great example. You get to see her on TV. She's in Subway commercials, Allstate commercials, all these insurance commercials. And yeah, it has to capture the imagination and young people watching. And that was the great thing about the Four Nations too, to go back to it. Like I heard from so many non-hockey people, Dan, right? And I mean, NFL types, people who would never give hockey the time of day and were watching it and fell in love with it. And I go back to the fights, and people won't like this, but I think the Tkachuk fights on the Saturday night in Montreal, the 3 fights in 9 seconds really made the tournament. Look, people would have watched US-Canada. I get that. But that attracted a certain crowd. I know people were calling their buddies. You got to put this on with the hopes of maybe seeing it again, which we didn't. But I thought the fights had a great impact on the television rating and whatever. You're a hockey person. Who cares? Whatever it is to get you there. And now can the NHL harness that momentum? We had great games yesterday and the day before on ABC2. And now here it comes, Dan, right? Here's the outdoor game in Columbus. Little Ohio State, Michigan flavor for you. Here's the trade deadline and the run to the playoffs and what I think is the best postseason in all of sports. So can this momentum keep going?
Why did they fight right away?
So there's a story that they had a group chat, like on a text chain that the Canadians, of course, are now making fun of after the tournament was over. But the two Tkachuks and JT Miller, who were out there, they had a chain. Hey, you go first. No, I'll go first. You go. Who's going to go first? All right, I'll take the first guy. You come after me. And it was, it was like right out of the Bash Brothers for the Mighty Ducks movie, right? And it was wild. I think they caught the Canadians off guard. The Tkachuks, they love being the villains up in Canada where they're booing the American national anthem. And although that sideshow is definitely going on and plays a role, and I think the Tkachuk brothers shook the place up. I think it shook everything up. It got everyone on board, and Canada didn't back down. And, they won one of the fights, at least, I think. And but it seemed to galvanize the whole tournament and bring it together. And if you're asking, who's the face of hockey in the U.S., I think it's Matthew Tkachuk. And the downside of the Four Nations, Dan, and this is, the only negative to this whole great tournament, we don't know when Matthew's coming back. He plays for the defending Stanley Cup champs, and there's talk he might not come back this season. So, you don't want the All-Star game where the guys aren't trying hard, but when guys are out there killing each other,
I know.
you get real injuries. Shea Theodore hurt himself, Vegas's top defenseman, and there's Charlie McAvoy of Boston. We don't know when he's coming back. So that's the risk versus reward in a tournament like this.
Yeah, and that's why the All-Star game turned into a joke in the NBA, and that's why they had to do away with the Pro Bowl. That there was fear of injury, and guys who make $20 million a year are not going to risk themselves in an exhibition game. It's just the way things go. As far as this tournament, and it was a grand slam for hockey. This was as good as you could have expected, better than anybody could have expected. So when you have an event like this, don't you bring it back every year? Well, we know one thing. It's not going to be next year because they're going to take a break for the Olympics. But as Levy points out, this may be the one and only four-nation tournament that will ever have because there's nothing guaranteed about this going forward.
I think this is a one-off. I don't think we see four nations again in this exact format with the Olympics next year.
Do you think that's a mistake?
No, listen, the only downside, and we're really nitpicking because this thing was unbelievable, made for television, gimmicky, and we obviously got the right matchup in the end and the right places. There are still some great players. I mean, if you want best on best, Alexander Ovechkin's not there. David Pastrnak is not there. These are, outstanding players. And there's 5 or 6 other guys. And listen, but this could have gone awfully wrong, right? We could have had the Finns and Swedes. And while they hate each other, they despise each other at least as much as America and Canada does. I'm not sure 9.3 million people would have tuned in the U.S.
I was wondering about this. If they did this again, could you see where there was a draft of Russian players? Each nation got to bring somebody just so I can incorporate some of these great players. And maybe you don't want to recognize Russia, but you still have to recognize the players who play in your league. Could you have something like that? Would that work for these nations?
Something, absolutely, because you can't do another one of these tournaments without those guys. It's not then best on best. The draft is an interesting idea. I hadn't heard that. We've done world team before, right? So everybody other than, U.S., Canada, and so on. So I want to give Greg Wyshynski credit because he writes for ESPN.com. I don't know if it's his idea, but he told me about it. He broached the idea of a summit series so we can just get the U.S., Canada, okay, and are assured of that. And the 1972 Summit Series, people of our age, Dan, remember Paul Henderson scores the goal. They had a best of 8, and it was simply Canada against the USSR. I don't know how they got to best of 8. I don't know how that works. Doesn't make any sense, but things were different in 72. And so just because the U.S.-Canada thing was so good, but I'm with you. We need to incorporate everybody and have 2 spots, right? You want to have 2 roster spots for, players who are not American or Canadian or something along those lines. But I think we go to 5 or 6 or 8 nations, and you hope for the matchup we got in Boston on Thursday night.
That's Steve Levy with Dan Patrick on hockey, and I've just spent the last 16, 17 minutes talking about hockey. That's got to be a record for me. We'll shift to the NBA, and as great a contract as Josh Harris has with Jaden Daniels, where he's going to pay him, $6.5 million over the next 2 years. He's got a nightmare of a deal with Joel Embiid, one of the other teams that he owns, the Philadelphia 76ers. And Tim Legler was on our morning show yesterday on Sportsmanlike. He's got the breakdown on just how bad this deal is. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
JP Finley, who you see on Channel 4, spends a lot of time covering the Commanders, puts this out on Twitter. Source confirms John Allen has permission to seek a trade. Played well in the playoffs, but missed most of the season with injury. Perhaps Allen is a trade piece for another player, too, Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel, among many available in the trade market. What I had heard was that Allen's money is not guaranteed for next year, that they could simply release him and they wouldn't owe him any money. That's my understanding on that. Now, maybe there is some value for him in the trade market in the way that, if you see a player that you would like to have and you don't want him to hit free agency and sign with somebody else, then you might make a deal. Although I can't see the Commanders picking up some of this money on their cap. But I don't know. Maybe there'd be a restructure or something like that. But that's something that makes sense for both sides. Allen's getting older. He's had injuries before, and I think that this is the time probably to move on from him. Good for him for coming back. Good job. A lot of guys would have checked out for the year, but given how little success this team has had, the chance to go all the way and play in the NFC Championship game was something he obviously wanted to do and was helpful in doing that. I just can't see a team picking up his salary. I don't know how these things work. But what he's making, and that's how they do these contracts, they backload a lot of the money and so forth. I just can't see that a team would pick that up. But, that's why they hire highly paid and very smart people like Adam Peters to figure these things out. By the way, Peters is going to speak today at the Combine. Now, the Combine doesn't start until Thursday. They don't start the Underwear Olympics until then. But I guess they're going to do the news conference. I would assume that Dan Quinn is going to speak at some point. And, kind of unlike last year, we're not going to hang on every word because they're going to be talking about players at 29 unless they're planning to move up. But the great quarterback chase, which had been going on here for decades, is over. And there really aren't great quarterbacks this year anyway. But that's the whole thing about the draft. And I worked with Mel Kiper for 6 years. I love Mel Kiper. But the interest in the draft is really curious because once you get past the first 10 picks, most casual fans have no idea who these players are. Now, you always talk about needs and so forth, but the fact that this has turned into an NFL Woodstock where they move it from city to city every year and thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of people show up for these things, it's crazy. And you're cheering on a left tackle from Oregon who you never heard of before the draft. But it's everything the NFL touches turns to gold. And this is a big part of it. So keep an eye on John Allen, who may have played his last snap for Washington. Some NBA stuff. I'll get to what Tim Legler said about Joel Embiid in a second. But Adrian Wojnarowski, who was the insider for ESPN and made a very public exit at the beginning of the season. Oh, I just can't do it anymore. And look how much money I'm giving up. I was making supposedly $7 million a year, and now he's making $75,000 going back to his alma mater at St. Bonaventure, where he is the general manager of the team. That's the way things work these days. And that includes raising money for NIL to try to get players to go to St. Bonaventure. This, to me, I know the heart is in the right place, but it seems to me that this is a little bit egotistical. He is selling the phones that he used to break the stories, the Woj bombs. It doesn't have the contacts on them. No. You don't have the names of LeBron and general managers and agents throughout the league. It doesn't have that. But the phones that he used to break these big reports, he's selling them. And he put this out on Twitter, I guess. He said, own the phones I use to report the biggest stories in basketball. Use the link to bid on my original iPhones, NBA draft credentials, dinner with me, and help support Bonnie's basketball. Again, it's not going in his pocket. I understand that. He's doing it for the right reasons for his job, and raising money for the school. But seriously, what are you going to do? You're going to put this on the mantle? I mean, this is the phone that Adrian Wojnarowski used to tell you that LeBron wants to stay in Los Angeles or whatever. There is, I guess, the most valuable phone in the collection, the one he used to break the news that Kevin Durant was going to sign with Golden State was at 2016. The lowest bid stands at $150 for his 2023 NBA All-Star Game credential. I got a box full of credentials over the years. I got Super Bowl credentials. I got an All-Star Game credential from the one that was here in 2001. Goes up as high as $750 for his 2023 NBA credential, featuring Victor Wembanyama, number 1. And then the phone that was used to announce that the league was shutting down in March of 2020, I guess, that phone is up for sale. Okay. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to raise money. I guess Woj would be an interesting dinner companion if he could share a lot of the secrets he has and telling you how he broke all these stories. A lot of times it's agents calling him, but I mean, of all the things that you might want to have, this is the Woj phone. This is the, oh, can I touch that? Can I hit some of the buttons? Oh, God, that's great. It's a Woj phone. All right. Tim Legler on the morning show yesterday. Tim's career is moving into another gear. I'm happy about that. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the years. As a matter of fact, I believe that I did the first broadcast work with Tim Legler. It was when he was still a player. I think they were even still named the Bullets at that point. It was during the summer, and Tony was off on vacation, and I was the sidekick, and Tim filled in for Tony. And he was a natural at it. He was great. I think he had a couple of his teammates on, and he knew how to do it. He'd listened to enough radio and had enough skill, but he was a pleasure to work with, and he did various things over the years, and now he's transitioned into not only being an analyst in the studio for ESPN, but he's starting to do games, and he's really good at it, really good. And so anyway, he was on the morning show yesterday on Sportsmanlike, and they took a look at what is an absolute mess with the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid. I mean, they went through the process with, what's his name, Hinkie, and Sam Hinkie, and they got to the point where they had accumulated enough draft picks that they thought they had a chance to win. This is the strategy for the Wizards, although they did finally get win number 10 last night. But he got to the point where he had the guy they were building around, Joel Embiid, and he would be the centerpiece on a team that they hope would compete for a championship. Well, Embiid's knee is a mess, and there's various reports that they may just shut him down and he'll have surgery. I think he's only played 19 games this year. He did play in the Olympics. He wanted to play in the Olympics this past summer, which probably didn't help, but this is where they are. And on top of everything else, he's got 4 years left on a deal that's going to pay him a boatload of money, guaranteed, whether he takes the court or not. So this was Legler yesterday with Unsportsmanlike on just where the Sixers are with Embiid.
Here's what's crazy. I mean, you talk about frustration, and I feel bad for Nick Nurse. I mean, I don't know that there's a more wasted basketball brain on the planet than Nick Nurse.
Yours.
Well, I hope it's not.
I'm saying coach NBA.
Oh, as a coach.
I'm saying NBA teams hire this man, not away from ESPN, like in addition to. Sorry.
side gig.
It that way.
A side gig.
Yeah.
No, but he's what are you going to do with Joel Embiid? You just gave him a $193 million extension. So I understand the part of like, no, you know what? We're going to make this guy earn some of this money. I mean, we got Paul George here. We got Maxey. We have enough talent. This has been such a debacle. But at the same time, based on his movements and what he is saying, he needs surgery. And so if you just continue to rest him a little bit, then roll him out there for a night and he's sort of limping around, he's literally like a coffee table defensively now. He has no impact on the game defensively. He's not an efficient offensive player. I mean, that's up to you. And try to sneak in as a play-in team and then get bounced and then you're done for the summer and potentially make whatever he's got a lot worse. I think at this point, do you have much of a choice than to just let this guy go get whatever it is, physically corrected, see what you can get done with Maxey and Paul George if you really that important you to make the play-in this year and do that. But it's gotten ugly there, obviously. Nick Nurse had finally lost it the other night. He's like, I can't watch this anymore. I'm not going to play in the fourth quarter. And, Joel Embiid hasn't really said too much about that yet. So we'll see where it goes from here. But he's physically not right. He's not going to be right until he gets that surgically addressed.
This team is infuriating to me on so many levels because most teams that go wrong don't have answers right in front of them, and I actually think this team does. If you think about it, Embiid never should have played in the Olympics. They never should have given him the contract extension. They should have rested him to start this season this year. They have a guy who works for the parent company in Bob Myers who's sitting there working for your squad and the Commanders, who they should offer an arm and a leg to run their basketball team. Daryl Morey constantly builds teams to underachieve. I don't care what people say about the Rockets. They're not winning the title if Chris Paul was healthy. LeBron would have beaten that team. And you're sitting there with two guys in Maxey and McCain that you actually can build around, who play with joy. Paul George told you he didn't want to be on your team. He wanted to be on the Clippers. And they made all of these moves, Legs. It's inexcusable how they've operated there in Philadelphia. And I know you're close to that. You live right there. But we all saw this coming.
$400 million going forward committed to Joel Embiid and Paul George. Oh. $400 million.
You're going to have to pay people to take them now.
Yeah, I mean, and so I got hit up, with some questions last night talking about the topics I'm going to be covering today, and it's like, should they move him? Try moving Joel Embiid right now.
Yeah, you may get Bradley Beal for him.
I mean, seriously, what do teams think they're getting back? You can't just constantly be enamored with the talent. Not with this many years of dealing with these kinds of things with Embiid. Obviously, he's a massive talent. That's not remotely the issue. And now Paul George, with all the time he seems to miss on an annual basis. Yes, I agree with you about Maxey. I agree with you about McCain. Unfortunately, he goes down too. Right. But here's the thing. They know, like Tyrese Maxey, if he's your best player, and I think you saw some of this last year when Maxey was out there when Embiid wasn't there. I mean, they were significantly below 500 on those nights. So what are you if Maxey's your best player, is the guy you build around?
Happy.
Maybe, but you're not. But at professional sports level, that's not going to be good enough. You're
But
trying
if
to
Bob
always
Myers
think
runs
how
your
you
team, that's how he does it.
Yeah,
you start with that.
They're a long way. They're a long way from happy in Philadelphia. I can tell you right now. I did a half-hour sports talk radio there a couple days ago, and fortunately, they're still riding the high of the Super Bowl.
Look how annoyed he is.
So it's going to buy them a little bit of time. Because people are still in a very good mood in Philly.
That's Tim Legler yesterday on Unsportsmanlike, and I guess it's a cautionary tale for the Wizards if they didn't know. But you lose. You get to the point where you get a player like Embiid, you build around him, and at a point where you're expecting to contend for championships, as Legler said, as a defender, he's a coffee table right now, and he's not very mobile on offense. So, you pretty much have to flush this year unless it means something to you to say you're a playoff team. But they're the 12th seed right now. They have to push to get into the play-in game. I mean, it's, God, what a disaster. What a complete disaster this is. And unlike football, even Deshaun Watson, and that was guaranteed money, but you can kind of move on. Basketball, you really can't. And, you can't trade him. You can't trade. So what's the big deal? You take Phoenix's garbage for your garbage? I mean, I don't know. That's just a mess. So hopefully the people that are running the Wizards, Michael Winger is the president of the team, and they can find a way to avoid this. But I don't even know how you can. I mean, can you count on Embiid actually, being healthy when you make the deal? No, you can't. And I guess there wasn't anything they could do about the Olympics. I just watched, by the way, it's a 4-part series, like 4 hours long. That's on. Maybe it's even 5 parts. It's on Netflix, and it's behind the scenes for basketball for the last Olympics, not just the U.S., but the other countries. And they focused a lot on Steph and Durant. LeBron really didn't do any sit-downs with him. They had news conference stuff from him and so forth. But it's one of the more comprehensive documentaries I've ever seen, because instead of just taking you behind the scenes with the U.S. team, they're doing the other countries as well. And in some cases, it's one country playing another, not the U.S. A lot of subtitles in there, so forth and so on. And it's and also, you get a view in the locker room, and this is something that you don't often see. Like at the end of the game, you'll see sometimes a player will put a towel over his head or he'll be upset, and then they shake hands, and sometimes they hug it out. But once they got into the locker room where they weren't in the view of the public, some of these players who are outright bawling, like they were 9 or 10 years old and they lost a Little League game or lost the Little League championship by dropping a fly ball or something. I mean, it's really, it tells you a lot, and it tells you how much they want to play for their country. Now, if they do this with the NBA All-Star game, which is seemingly the last resort now, where you have the U.S. versus the world, will they play as hard as they did in the Olympics? But Joel Embiid, who wanted to win a gold medal and got caught up, I'm sure, with the great players that he was playing alongside, with LeBron and with Steph and Durant and those guys that, he gave it everything he had. Well, now the team that's paying him $1 gazillion a year doesn't have him, and they're in a circumstance where they either, grit their teeth and try to get to play in with him, or they shut him down for yet another season and hope he comes back healthy next year. And, one of the things about him, he's not Victor Wembanyama. He's a big, bulky guy. And when you're talking about knee problems, it's a little bit different with players like that. Kevin Durant has come back from an injury that used to end careers, a torn Achilles, and he's as good as he's ever been. But it doesn't usually happen that way, and he's very thin and he's very light. This is not the case with Joel Embiid. So that's a mess. But here's a pick me up. The Detroit Pistons, if you haven't been paying attention, they had their worst record ever and the worst record in the league last year, 14-68. They are now 32-26. That's the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, and on the second night of a back-to-back, they won their 7th straight game. It's the last time they won 7 straight, 10 years ago. What did they do in the offseason? Well, they made changes in the front office. They made changes at the coaching position. Trajan Langdon, remember him from Duke? He's the new team president. J.B. Bickerstaff, Bernie Bickerstaff's kid. Bernie Bickerstaff, longtime assistant here with the Bullets when they were really good, when they went to the finals back-to-back years, and later replaced Jim Lynam as coach of the team in the 90s. Cade Cunningham, number one pick of the 2021 draft, is living up to expectations or greater. He's averaging 25.8 points a game, 9.5 assists, 6.3 rebounds. Only Trae Young and Nikola Jokic, MVP. Jokic won 3, I think, MVPs. They're the only ones with more assists than Cunningham has this season. So the message is it can be turned around. If they get Cooper Flagg, will they turn it around like the Pistons have? Who knows? Who knows? But the Pistons were the worst team in the league last year. The Wizards were right on their tail. But this year, they're far from the worst. They're going to be in the playoffs, and right now they're the number 6 seed. So message is you can turn it around. All right, coming up in the next hour, Albert Breer has a look at the Matt Stafford situation and how is it possible that he'll get out of Los Angeles. Doesn't make any sense, but I've got some contract numbers on that as well that we will talk about. All that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
Oh, the changes with the Commanders continue. Just about a year ago, Adam Peters was introduced as the new general manager of the team, and he was asked by David Aldridge to assess the current roster. It took him 3.5 seconds before he could get his thoughts together to answer that, and he said, well, there are pieces. And before you know it, we had a new roster here in Washington that didn't resemble the old one, and the longest-serving member of the team looks like he's on his way out. Jonathan Allen, according to the insiders who covered the team, first reported by J.P. Finley, has been given permission to seek a trade, which is going to leave, I guess, Deron Payne and Terry McLaurin, maybe one or two other. Oh, yeah. Well, we always got the punter, Tress Way, who's going to come back for his 12th season, I assume. Although he is a free agent. I just wonder, how it's going to go. I mean, it's hard to assess the season that he had because he didn't have to punt much. He won a couple of games this year without a single punt. And, it's got to be the lowest. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Got to be the lowest number of punts that he's ever had in his career. But anyway, here's the deal with John Allen. He was due to make $15.5 million this year, and that's a cap hit that they don't want to take. And if they cut him loose, then they don't have to pay him anything. Now the reports are that he's been given permission to seek a trade, and that I'm sure that they're if they don't get things worked out, they'll just release him. It doesn't seem to be any chance of that, but it could be part of a trade situation. Who knows? He could get I'm sure he would, if he does agree to a trade and they agree to make the deal. He's probably got to restructure his deal so that they take less of a cap hit wherever he goes. But that's all part of what Peters is doing, and he won't say this when he talks to the media today at noon, but they're a year ahead of schedule. They're probably 2 years ahead of schedule. Even with high hopes for Jaden Daniels coming out of college, that they were not going to be this good. They're that good. They're really that good. And this is a go-for-it time. They have this great quarterback under a rookie deal for 2 more years. They're going to have to extend probably after the third season of the deal because it's 4 years guaranteed. Then they got the 5th-year option. I don't think, unless things really tail off, that they're just going to pick up the 5th-year option. They're going to probably work out a long-term deal. They're smart about those things. But in the meantime, guys who are older, coming off an injury, though Allen did make it back last year after the torn pectoral, you move on. You redo the roster. And, if you look at the career of Jonathan Allen, it's one of those ones where you go, damn. Great career for a team that just wasn't very good. Ken Harvey came here as a free agent 1994, which is Norv Turner's first year. And he made the Pro Bowl 4 times. He was a terrific player. Played 11 years in the NFL, including his time with the Cardinals. Never played in a playoff game. Jonathan Allen, what did he get? 2 playoff games? The one in 2020
And not 2 because he played 3 this year. Boy, you forget that. You forget that this team played 3 playoff games this year. So, yeah, I mean, he got 4 playoff games, but he played on teams that were at times embarrassing. Meantime, you got the curious Matt Stafford situation with the Los Angeles Rams. He's apparently got tread left on the tire. He came within a drive of getting the Rams into the NFC Championship game. I mean, it could have been Washington going to Los Angeles instead of Philadelphia, and they came up short in the snow. He's still got it, and he's on a team with a great coach in Sean McVay. It would seem that he'd want to stay there, though his wife has been very public. She does her own podcast. You know, she's the one that's in the mattress commercials with him, and she's saying that she was unhappy that the team is not bringing back Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's unhappy about that. You don't usually hear a player go public like that, but he doesn't understand why they're getting rid of him. And she said, well, you know, I don't understand that either. And I like Los Angeles, but I like an adventure too. You really don't like that if you're a team. That's not really good for business. But there's also the business of football, and it would seem, even though he was being his, 36, 37, you'd still want him, but it doesn't all add up. They've given him permission to look for other offers, which seems insane. Albert Breer covers the NFL for SI.com on yesterday on the Rich Eisen Show with an explanation of what he thinks is going on.
I don't think he wants to leave Southern California. I think he really likes living in Southern California. I think he really likes playing for McVay. I think that relationship is still on really solid ground. This is about the contract. And it goes back to last year. They had a 6-month negotiation that really didn't end in a solution. It ended in a Band-Aid. You know, he got a $5 million raise on paper, but that $5 million was only borrowed money from future years. So $4 million from 25 and $1 million from 26. And, you know, when a team does that with a player, it's basically an acknowledgement. We're going to be back at the negotiating table a year from now because this player is not going to play for this lower number. Play for the lower number, then you didn't get a raise at all. So, you know, there was that acknowledgement that they would revisit things. When they removed the guaranteed money from 25 last summer. And, you know, I think the complications that existed last year still exist. I think the biggest thing you want to look at here, Rich, is timelines and where the teams are and where the sides are. And Matthew Stafford's 37 years old and everything's about right now for Matthew Stafford. He's been through a lot physically. You know, the quarterback market has once again gone way past what he's making. You know, there are 9 quarterbacks now making over $50 million per year, and rightfully so. He feels like he should be in that group of quarterbacks that's making over that number. You know, on the other side, you've got the Rams who are looking at it and saying, okay, well, we've got a younger team now, and we're the second youngest team in football. And we're building around Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams and Kobe Turner and Byron Young and Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and all these great young players that Les Snead and Sean McVay have gotten there. And do we go all in at $50 million with a guy when we may not be sure he's going to play a second year, a third year on whatever the new contract is? And that's what causes you to look around a little bit. And if another team is willing to swoop in and give you a first-round pick, now maybe you look at it and you say, is Aaron Rodgers willing to come to Los Angeles on a discounted rate? And then he's our one-year answer. Instead of Stafford being our one-year answer, we save all this money. And, oh, by the way, we get all these picks as part of the exchange. It's, I think, another example of the Rams looking at things a little bit differently than other teams do. I think it's a result of Matthew Stafford looking at it and saying, I've only got so many more years to earn left, and I should be making what I'm worth. And, you know, again, I think just the timelines of the two sides are in different places. You know, the Rams forever were this win now machine, you know, like we'll do whatever it takes. We'll move any assets around to win right now. That's what Matthew Stafford came into in 2021. It's an organization in a different spot right now.
So what's the timeline to get something decided, right? Is it the new league year, Albert?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Well, there's I believe a roster bonus. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it's a roster bonus that I think is due in the middle of March that is sort of the and I think I don't think it's even like that costly. I think it might be $5 million. But it's something like if you're the Rams, you don't want to pay out, whatever that roster bonus is. You don't want to pay that out if he's not going to be on your team this year. So, I mean, for that reason, that's sort of a deadline that sits in there. And you also, if you're the Rams, like, hey, like if you're not going to be our quarterback this year, well, we want to be in on Aaron Rodgers, on Sam Darnold. We need to figure out what we're going to do with Jimmy Garoppolo, who Sean McVay really likes, by the way. That's sort of where they are. So I would say, I mean, it's not like it's a hard deadline in the middle of March, but I'd say you want to get it done by the middle of March. And really, like, this week is the time to do it, because this is the week when you might have a cup of coffee with Sam Darnold's agent. You might sit down with Aaron Rodgers' agent and discuss all of these things, So this is a critical week, I'd say, for Stafford and for the Rams to figure out where they're at going into 2025.
Have numbers been exchanged and thus deemed by either party on, not seeing eye to eye on that, and thus in Stafford's shopping, allowed to shop? Like, what's the scoop?
So here's what's interesting about it. I know Tom mentioned that on your show, right? Like on Friday, right? That he has permission. He's had permission for 2.5 weeks now. He got permission from the Rams to go talk to other teams during Super Bowl week. So they've had a lot of time to look at this and gauge his value. And, so the teams you'd expect, the Giants, the Steelers, the Browns, the Raiders, are in that mix. Now, I don't know what each team offered. I'm sure some teams were probably short of the $50 million number. What I can say is, coming out of that, I think he felt more resolute that $50 million, that he should be in that class. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to hold a gun to the Rams' head and say, you got to give me $50 million or I'm out of here. But $27 million, which is where he's at in cash for 2025, is not close to 50, So the Rams have to get a hell of a lot closer, at least, I think, to work this out. And, again, like, that's sort of the risk in letting him go out and take a look, is you let him go take a look, like, he might get an answer that you don't like. And, like, my understanding, again, is that he came out of this with more resolve that his worth is in that range where the top 9 quarterbacks are for 2025.
That's Albert Breer of SI.com on the Rich Eisen show yesterday. Here's the money figures, and this is crazy. Realize this, and this is without endorsements or anything like that, but number 2 all time on the money list in the NFL, not just quarterback, any player who's ever played in the NFL, Matt Stafford's number 2. He's earned $364 million over his 16 years in the NFL. This is about keeping score. It's not obviously about need, but he's made all that money, and he wants to be in the class with the top quarterbacks, and should be. This is the way things are done. Aaron Rodgers is number 1, $381 million over 20 years. Stafford, $364 over 16. Then you get to the interesting numbers on those behind him. Tom Brady, who played 23 years. Now, realize he came in as a 6th-round pick, and Andrew Brandt has written about this a number of times. Brandt knows the ins and outs of this because he was the cap guy for the Packers for years, and he writes about sports business. He says he still can't figure out why Brady left so much money on the table. But as the greatest quarterback ever, the winningest quarterback, he's made in his career $317 million. 317. So he's number 3 on the list. Number 4 might stun you. Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan may be a Hall of Famer, maybe not. Played in 1 Super Bowl and, was on the short end of the biggest comeback ever by Brady and the Patriots, the 1 year he made it with Atlanta. He's number 4. He's made $306 million during his career. And then Russell Wilson is number 5, and he's got some football left, so there may be another deal for him. $305 million. And the greatest money winner of all time relative to talent ever in football history has to be Kirk Cousins. $293 million on his contract with guaranteed money coming up this year. And that's 27.5, which means that he is going to pass Brady. So no matter where he plays this year, even if he doesn't play, if he's cut by Atlanta and nobody picks him up, Kirk Cousins, who will be going to Canton by bus, he will be the number 3 highest paid quarterback, highest paid player in NFL history. Now, there's more money to be made by Stafford and maybe more money to be made by the number 1 Aaron Rodgers. But just think about that. Think about how savvy Kirk Cousins has been in getting these deals. I mean, whatever you think of him as a quarterback, as a savvy businessman with his agent, he's the best of all time. He's a Hall of Famer when it comes to getting contracts because he's going to top $300 million. I can't even say it. $300 million for a career that was good. He won 1 playoff game during his entire career. Tom Brady won 7, count them 7 Super Bowls. And after this year, no matter where Kirk Cousins is, whether he's sitting home on his couch or whether he's starting 17 games and maybe leading his team to a Super Bowl, Tom Brady will fall behind at number 3 to Kirk Cousins. Just absolutely incredible. Speaking of NFL and money, Pete Carroll was on a flight from Seattle to Indianapolis. He's now the coach of the Raiders, but I guess he's still living in Seattle. So to travel to the Combine, he got on a plane in Seattle. And on the plane, as you would expect in first class, were the coaches of the Seahawks. The Seahawks coaching staff was there, and there's a picture that was put up of him walking up to first class to chat it up with them. And the question is, why were the Raiders flying Pete Carroll to the Combine in Indianapolis in coach? Why was he sitting there? And there was reaction on Twitter from this. Clarence Hill, who covers the Cowboys, their beat writer, says, Raiders being cheap, shocked. Ed Werder, been around. He covers the Cowboys for WFAA TV. Pete deserves better. According to Gary Cohn of the 49ers on SI, Carroll spent some time in first class where he talked to Mike McDonald and general manager John Schneider of the Seahawks for about an hour. Yeah, he was standing there for about an hour. Didn't have a seat. Standing there for about an hour. And according to Bob Condotta of the Seahawks, he's their beat writer, he put up a photo of Carroll signing autographs in the terminal in Indianapolis, so didn't appear to be too upset by that. But that was one of the stories about the Bears too. That when Dan Quinn interviewed for the Bears job, they flew him there coach. I guess he was in Dallas. He went coach from Chicago to Dallas, and I don't know if he was offered the job, but if he was offered the job and turned it down, that might have been part of the reason. Now, there was a picture of Quinn standing in the security line after he'd interviewed with the Commanders. I assume that was to get on a first-class flight back to Dallas. He had an interview with the team personnel at the hotel. I guess he stayed at the Four Seasons in Georgetown, and then they put him in a car, and I guess they took him to Dulles. But there is a picture of that. But Pete Carroll, who's already employed, like at that point, Quinn wasn't employed. He flew commercial, but he flew, I'm sure, first class. Bad news for Georgetown basketball. Enjoyed watching this guy play this year. He's probably going to wind up being the freshman of the year in the Big East. Thomas Sorber. It seems that on Saturday, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday before, he suffered a foot injury that's going to require surgery. He's having surgery tomorrow. They expect that he will recover fully, but will not play anymore this year. And then you get to the question of, will he be drafted high enough that he wouldn't come back for a second year? Could this conceivably, you never want to see anybody hurt, but could this conceivably work in the favor of Ed Cooley in Georgetown in that they get this great player back for a second year when they might not have if he had remained healthy? The other thing is, you're going to have like these combines and other workouts for prospects and individual workouts. If he's having foot surgery, this is just about March, you would think that it's going to take him 3, 4, 5 months to recover from that. And they got the draft coming up in June. Does he decide right now, rather than, put himself in a position where they start projecting him down the board because they don't have enough information to work with. Does he automatically come back now and play another year at Georgetown with the opportunity to improve his draft stock? I think that's something that he has to consider. But he's been a terrific player for them, a big man who's really and they've played pretty well this year. They've had a record that's respectable. The first year under Cooley had to totally rebuild after what Patrick Ewing left behind, but he's got the program on track, and they'll probably wind up the season with 17, 18 wins. I think it's 15 now, 14, something like that. So it's too bad. Thomas Sorber will not play again this year for Georgetown. Coming up, 53 years ago today, arguably the worst baseball trade ever made. Tell you about that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Going to need a cheesesteak or maybe a pretzel with mustard for the next few minutes. Got a couple of very interesting Philadelphia stories to talk about. One historical, and it goes back 53 years ago today, and tells you a lot about the state of baseball salaries at the time. This is 1972, so we're about 4 years away from free agency. You still had the reserve clause, so a player could hit free agency, but he couldn't sign with another team because the team he was playing for had the reserve clause. You either play for them or you don't play. You could hold out, and some did, but if you wanted to play baseball, you had to play for that team that year. Curt Flood had 2 years earlier begun the fight, which he lost, and lost in Supreme Court, challenging the reserve clause, and it wasn't until 1976 that it was overturned. So you've got Steve Carlton, who's pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals, young pitcher, great pitcher, and you got Rick Wise, who's an excellent pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's also about the same age, early to mid-20s, and these are two of the top pitchers in the National League, and each of them is unhappy with his contract. So a deal is worked out where it's a one-for-one trade. Now, you wouldn't see this today, but it happened on this day in 1972 that the Philadelphia Phillies, in one of the great trades ever made, maybe the greatest trade and certainly the greatest trade that they ever made, they traded Rick Wise to the St. Louis Cardinals for Steve Carlton. Steve Carlton went on to win how many games for them? Steve Carlton went on to win 241 games. He had over 3,000 strikeouts with the Phillies. He won 4 Cy Youngs, helped them make it to a couple of World Series, winning one in 1980. He was spectacular, going on to be one of the great left-handed pitchers in the history of baseball. Rick Wise spent 2 years with the Cardinals, going 32-28, and was traded after 2 years to the Boston Red Sox, bounced around, was out of baseball by 1982, and he finished with a career record, not bad, 188 and 181, but he's not a Hall of Fame pitcher like Steve Carlton. Now, Carlton was a bad guy. He didn't talk to reporters for most of his career, and some of his interests are not exactly my interests, but as a pitcher, he was great. One of the great strikeout pitchers, one of the great pitchers, period, of all time. And what he did in that first season, going to a last-place team in Philadelphia, Bing Devine wanted to kind of give him the middle finger, leaving a contending team like the Cardinals to go to the Phillies, who were the worst team. He won 27 games for a team that won 59. He had almost half of their wins. He had 31 complete games. His ERA was under 2, 1.97. This is miraculous. And wait till you hear what the money dispute was over. This was Carlton some years after he retired. He's on one of these QVC shows selling his jerseys and gloves and stuff like that. And he was telling the story of how on this day in 1972, he was traded from the very good St. Louis Cardinals to the very bad Philadelphia Phillies.
I'd won 20 games in 1971 for the Cardinals, and they were always finishing first, second, and third, winning 80, 85 as a team, 90 games a year. So I had upped my goals to 25 victories the following year. So I'd been, as soon as the 1971 season over with, I was concentrating on, mentally painting this picture of what I'm going to do the following year, 1972, and it was a goal of 25 victories. So when I got traded opening day of spring training 1972 to the last place the last place Phillies. I was going, oh my God.
Must have been kind of a shock for you.
Oh, geez, I called Bing Devine back. I said, Bing, I'll take the money off because it was only $5,000 difference. They wanted to give me 60. I wanted 65 because I'd won 20 games, and they say they never pay unless you get 20-game wins. So I said, here I am, pay me, and they got rid of me, and I went to spring training in '72. And for a week, I was going, oh, my God, what am I going to do? As far as I spent 4 months focusing on what I'm going to do,
right.
As far as my victories. And I decided, I said, it's not too good a ball club, but I said, I'm going to hold on and see what happens. I'm going to focus more mentally than I've ever focused in my life. And I ended up in 1972 winning 27 games, which was 2 more than my goal was.
And almost half the amount you hold on the
Yes, it was for a last place ball club. They only won 59 games, and the season was shortened by about 12 or 14 games that year. That was a strike year, and we didn't start on time. I think we were about 12 or 14 games, shy of a full season, and so I would have had maybe 2 or 3 more starts out of that. So who knows? I had 31 complete games, which was quite unique that year. I mean,
it was.
With a last place ball club, you better finish the game.
You have to.
You're going to win anything.
How about that? It was over $5,000. He wanted 65. The Cardinals wanted to pay him 60, so they traded him. A pitcher like that, and pitchers don't really have numbers like that anymore because they don't have any complete games. He had 31 complete games in a season. And as he said, he had to complete the game because the bullpen stunk, and he didn't trust them to finish the game. But a pitcher like that, over $5,000, is traded away to a last-place team as kind of a middle finger to him. He goes on to a Hall of Fame career with the Philadelphia Phillies. If he hits the open market today, that's a $500 million deal. And this was over $5,000 53 years ago today. So it worked out very, very well for the Philadelphia Phillies. It did not work well at all for the St. Louis Cardinals, even though Rick Wise had a winning record. They shipped him out of town after 2 years. That's a wrap for me. Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.